The diplomatic transport hummed quietly through space as David Reynolds adjusted his formal uniform one last time. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment, humanity's first invitation to a Threxian honor feast. The alien species had only joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago, and their homeworld of Veltar remained largely mysterious to most civilizations. Tom Bradley sat across from him, reviewing their cultural briefings on his tablet. The young aide had spent weeks studying Threxian customs, but something about this particular ceremony kept bothering him. Every translation seemed deliberately vague about what exactly would happen at the feast. Dr. Lisa Chun emerged from the ship's small laboratory, carrying her standard xenobiology kit. She had been excited about this mission ever since learning that multiple alien species would be bringing examples of their homeworld's fauna. For a researcher who specialized in comparative biology, it was like being invited to the galaxy's best zoo. The ship's communication system crackled to life as they approached Veltar's orbital station. The Threxian voice that greeted them was deep and resonant, speaking in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Human vessel, you are cleared for landing. War Chief Velkara awaits your arrival with great anticipation." David had met War Chief Velkara only once before, during the formal Galactic Council proceedings on the neutral station of Haven Prime. The Threxian leader stood nearly 8 feet tall, with a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed like polished black metal. His species had evolved from something resembling a cross between a mantis and a rhino, creating beings that looked naturally armored and permanently ready for battle. As their transport descended through Veltar's atmosphere, the passengers pressed against the windows to see their destination. The planet's surface was dominated by vast crystalline structures that served as Threxian cities. The buildings seemed to grow from the ground itself, forming organic shapes that twisted toward the dark purple sky. The landing pad was surrounded by Threxian guards, each carrying ceremonial weapons that looked both decorative and absolutely lethal. Tom swallowed nervously as he watched the aliens move with predatory grace, their multiple arms flowing in synchronized motions that spoke of countless generations of warrior evolution. War Chief Velkara greeted them personally, which Tom's cultural briefings had indicated was a significant honor. The massive alien's head resembled a fusion of insect and reptile, with compound eyes that caught light like faceted gems. When he spoke, his mouth revealed rows of teeth that could probably bite through steel. "Ambassador Reynolds," Velkara said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the human's bones vibrate slightly, "you honor us with your presence. Tonight you will witness the sacred feast of worthiness, where the galaxy's finest representatives prove their courage before the most feared creatures known to civilization." David nodded politely, though he noticed Dr. Chun's eyes light up with scientific curiosity. The concept of a feast involving dangerous animals was certainly unique among galactic diplomatic customs. Most species preferred their formal dinners. To be as safe and predictable as possible, the Threxian delegation led them through corridors lined with what appeared to be trophies from countless hunts. Massive skulls and preserved specimens decorated the walls, each bearing small plaques written in Threxian script. Tom tried to read the translations his tablet provided, but most of them seemed to describe creatures with names like Bone Crusher of the Third Moon and the Screaming Death of Kevlar Valley. They entered a vast circular chamber where other diplomatic delegations had already assembled. David recognized the Cytherian ambassador, a serpentine being whose scales shifted color with his emotions. Currently, they were displaying a nervous pattern of rapid green and yellow flashes. The Kef delegation huddled together, their crystalline bodies refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns that seemed agitated rather than peaceful. Near the center of the room, the Belgian ambassador stood alone, his thick fur bristling with obvious anxiety. The small mammalian species rarely attended gatherings that involved any mention of predators, and his presence here suggested that declining the invitation would have been considered a serious diplomatic insult. War Chief Velkara moved to the chamber's center, where a raised platform held what appeared to be a control panel carved from the same crystalline material as the planet's cities. When he activated it, sections of the floor began to rise, revealing transparent enclosures that had been hidden beneath the chamber. The assembled diplomats gasped collectively as the containers became visible. Each enclosure held a creature that immediately triggered every evolved instinct for survival and flight. The Cytherian mountain stalker was a writhing mass of scales and venom sacs, easily 15 feet long and thick as a tree trunk. Its eyes glowed with predatory intelligence as it tested the barriers of its prison with careful probes of its massive head. The Keth deathbird spread wings lined with edges sharp enough to cut through metal, its crystalline feathers creating a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass. Even contained, it radiated an aura of barely controlled violence that made several delegates step backward involuntarily. The Belgian Shadow Wolf was, perhaps, the most disturbing of all. Its form seemed to shift and blur even while motionless, as if it existed partially in some other dimension. When it turned its attention toward the Belgian ambassador, the small diplomat's fur went completely white with terror. Warchief Velkara's voice boomed through the chamber as he gestured toward the contained nightmares. Behold the apex predators of our respective worlds. Tonight, each delegation will demonstrate their worthiness by facing the creatures that have defined fear for their species since the dawn of consciousness. This is how the Threxian people determine who is worthy to share our table and our trust. David looked around at his fellow diplomats and realized that most of them appeared to be on the verge of fainting or fleeing. The Cytherian ambassador had coiled into a defensive posture, while the Keth delegation was producing the harmonic whines that indicated extreme distress in their species. Tom leaned close to David and whispered, "Sir, I don't think our cultural briefings adequately prepared us for this situation." Dr. Chun, however, had moved closer to the enclosures and was studying each creature with obvious fascination. She pulled out her tablet and began taking notes, occasionally making small sounds of scientific appreciation that seemed wildly inappropriate. Given the circumstances, David cleared his throat and addressed War Chief Velkara directly. "These are magnificent specimens. I assume the ceremony involves some form of ritual observation of these creatures?" The Threxian leader's compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. "Oh no, Ambassador. The creatures will be released for the feast. How else can one properly demonstrate courage in the face of nature's perfect killers?" The chamber fell silent except for the sounds of the contained predators testing their enclosures and several diplomats beginning to hyperventilate. David glanced at Tom, who was frantically flipping through his cultural database looking for any precedent or protocol that might apply to this situation. Dr. Chun looked up from her tablet with bright enthusiasm. "War Chief, do you have any information about the nutritional content and preparation methods for these species? They look absolutely fascinating from a biochemical perspective." The silence that followed Dr. Chun's question stretched uncomfortably long. War Chief Velkara's massive head tilted to one side in a gesture that his species used to indicate confusion. The translator system built into the chamber's walls made several clicking sounds as it processed the human scientist's words, apparently having difficulty with the concept she had expressed. Tom watched the other diplomatic delegations with growing concern. The Cytherian ambassador had begun to emit the low hissing sound that indicated his species was preparing for either flight or combat. The crystalline Keth delegates were resonating at frequencies that made everyone's teeth ache, which their cultural files indicated was a sign of extreme agitation. The Belgian ambassador appeared to be having some sort of nervous breakdown, his small mammalian form trembling so violently that his thick fur was creating a visible cloud of shed hair around him. Every few seconds he would glance toward the Shadow Wolf in its enclosure, whimper softly, and then look away again as if burned. War Chief Velkara finally found his voice. "Preparation methods?" he repeated slowly. "Ambassador Reynolds, I fear there has been some misunderstanding in our communications. These creatures are not for consumption. They are instruments of honor, tests of courage in the face of death itself." David nodded thoughtfully while Dr. Chun continued to study the contained predators with obvious scientific interest. I see. So the ceremony involves demonstrating bravery by approaching these creatures while they're restrained. Not restrained, Velkara corrected, his compound eyes glittering with pride. Released. Each delegation must face their homeworlds. Apex predator in combat, or at least demonstrate the courage to stand before it without fleeing. Those who show true bravery will be deemed worthy of joining the sacred feast that follows. The Cytherian delegate made a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. Combat? War Chief Velkara? Surely you cannot mean actual combat with a mountain stalker. These creatures have terrorized my people for thousands of years. Their venom can dissolve rock. Which is precisely why facing one proves worthiness, Velkara replied with satisfaction. Any species that can stand before their ultimate fear has demonstrated the strength of character necessary for true alliance. Tom was frantically working his tablet, trying to find any diplomatic precedent for this situation. The Galactic Council's Handbook on Cultural Exchange Ceremonies made no mention of anything remotely resembling ritualized predator encounters. He leaned toward David and whispered, "Sir, I think we might need to diplomatically withdraw from this ceremony. I can't find any safety protocols that would cover this situation." Dr. Chen had moved even closer to the enclosures, seemingly oblivious to the mounting panic around her. She was now taking detailed measurements and notes about each creature's physical characteristics. Occasionally making small sounds of professional appreciation, the Belgian ambassador finally spoke, his voice high and squeaky with terror. "War Chief, with the deepest respect for Threxian customs, the shadow wolves of my world exist primarily in a quantum state that makes them nearly impossible to defend against. My people have survived by avoiding the regions where they hunt, not by confronting them directly." "Yes," Velkara agreed enthusiastically. "Fear is the natural response to a perfect predator. Only by overcoming that fear can one prove worthy of respect." The Keth delegate, whose crystalline form was still, producing discordant harmonics, managed to speak in their species' characteristic chiming voice. "Our deathbirds can fly at speeds approaching the sound barrier while maintaining perfect maneuverability. Their wing edges are molecularly sharp. The very sight of one has been known to cause our people to shatter from resonant stress." "War Chief." Velkara spread his forearms wide in a gesture of welcome. "Magnificent. Each of your species has produced the perfect test of courage. Tonight's ceremony will be remembered for generations as we witness the true character of our galactic neighbors." David cleared his throat diplomatically. "War Chief, might I ask how exactly one is expected to survive an encounter with these creatures? Are there weapons provided, or specific techniques that should be employed?" The Threxian leader's expression grew solemn. "Ambassador, the courage lies not in victory over the predator, but in the willingness to face it despite certain doom. Even a few seconds of standing firm before retreating demonstrates more honor than most beings possess. Those who manage to remain composed for a full minute will have achieved legendary status." Tom felt his diplomatic training crumble as he realized what they had walked into. This wasn't a ceremonial dinner, it was a ritual designed to test courage, through what amounted to controlled suicide attempts. He began calculating how quickly they could excuse themselves, and return to their ship. Dr. Chun suddenly looked up from her tablet with bright excitement. "Oh, this is fascinating. War Chief, do you happen to know what these creatures typically eat in their natural habitats?" "I'm particularly interested in the Shadow Wolf's metabolic requirements." Velkara blinked his compound eyes slowly. "They eat whatever they can catch, Dr. Chun. The Shadow Wolf primarily hunts the Belgian people themselves, along with their livestock. The mountain stalker consumes both organic and inorganic matter after dissolving it with its venom. The deathbird feeds on the crystalline formations that house the Keth civilization." "Wonderful," Dr. Chun said, making more notes. "And have any of your species ever attempted to domesticate or farm these creatures?" "The nutritional yield from apex predators is typically quite high, especially if they can be bred in controlled environments." The chamber fell so quiet that the only sounds were the predators moving within their enclosures and the Belgian ambassador's labored breathing. War Chief Velkara stared at the human scientist as if she had just suggested something incomprehensibly. Bizarre? Farm them? He repeated slowly. Dr. Chun, these are instruments of terror. They are not livestock. Well, not yet, Dr. Chun replied cheerfully. But most Earth predators started out as wild animals too. Lions, tigers, bears, sharks, even crocodiles. Humans learn to hunt them, then breed them, and eventually turn them into sustainable food sources. Some of them make excellent steaks. Tom watched in fascination as every alien delegate in the chamber turned to stare at the humans with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror. The translator systems began working overtime as several species started speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of confused exclamations. David maintained his diplomatic composure while internally marveling at Dr. Chen's ability to completely reframe any situation through a scientific lens. War Chief, I believe there may be some cultural differences in how our species approach predator relationships. On Earth, humans have historically dealt with dangerous animals by learning to hunt and consume them. War Chief Velkara forearms began to gesture in patterns that Tom's cultural database identified as indicating severe mental distress. You hunt your apex predators? Among other things, yes, David replied calmly. Dr. Chen is correct that many creatures that once threatened human settlements are now managed as food sources. We found that understanding a predator's biology and behavior patterns typically reveals effective methods for either avoiding or controlling them. The Cytherian ambassador's scales had shifted to a pattern of colors that Tom's translator indicated meant complete bewilderment mixed with mounting horror. You control mountain stalkers? We don't have mountain stalkers on Earth, Dr. Chun explained helpfully. But we have plenty of venomous creatures that are quite dangerous. Humans learn to extract the venom for medical purposes and use the meat for food. Very sustainable when properly managed. Tom realized that what had begun as a diplomatic ceremony was rapidly becoming a cultural education session that none of the aliens had been prepared for. The other delegates were staring at the humans with the kind of shocked fascination typically reserved for watching someone perform impossible magic tricks. Tom opened his diplomatic bag and began pulling out items that suddenly seemed much more relevant to their situation. His standard travel kit included a portable camping stove, basic spices, and emergency rations, but he had also packed some of his personal cooking supplies after reading that Threxian culture valued practical skills. War Chief Velkara watched with growing confusion as Tom set up the small cooking station on a nearby table. Ambassador Reynolds, what is your aide doing? The ceremony has not yet begun. Preparing, David replied simply. Dr. Chun, which of these creatures would you recommend for someone who has never cooked alien apex predators before? Dr. Chun looked up from her detailed notes with enthusiasm. Well, the Shadow Wolf appears to have a quantum-shifted cellular structure that might be tricky for beginners. The Deathbird's crystalline feathers would need to be removed carefully to avoid damaging the meat underneath. I'd suggest starting with the mountain stalker, since reptilian biochemistry is fairly straightforward and the venom sacs can be harvested separately for later use. The Cytherian ambassador made a sound like a deflating balloon. You want to cook the mountain stalker? Among other things, Tom said, testing his portable stove's flame. Do you know if it tastes better grilled or roasted? I brought some basic seasoning, but I'm not sure what would complement the flavor profile of a venomous apex predator. Tom noticed that the other alien delegations had begun moving away from the humans, though whether from fear or disgust was unclear. The Belgian ambassador was staring at them with wide eyes, his trembling having stopped entirely as he tried to process what he was witnessing. War Chief Velkara gestured toward the enclosures with obvious distress. These creatures are meant to test your courage through fear, not serve as ingredients for your meal. Why not both? Dr. Chun asked reasonably. Fear is typically based on misunderstanding or lack of preparation. Once you understand a predator's biology and nutritional value, it becomes much less threatening and much more useful. David walked calmly toward the enclosure containing the mountain stalker. The massive creature immediately focused on him, its glowing eyes tracking his movement while its forked tongue tested the air for chemical signatures. Several of the alien delegates gasped audibly as David approached the transparent barrier. Magnificent specimen, David said, examining the creature with obvious appreciation. Dr. Chun, what do you estimate the yield would be on something this size? Probably several 100 pounds of usable meat, she replied, joining him at the enclosure. The muscle structure suggests it would be quite tender if properly prepared. The venom sacs alone would be valuable for pharmaceutical applications. The mountain stalker pressed against the barrier, apparently recognizing that it was being discussed as potential food. Its massive head weaved back and forth in what the Cytherian delegate's cultural database probably described as hunting behavior, but which David interpreted as simple curiosity about these strange, new creatures. Tom had finished setting up his cooking station and was now reviewing the spice selection he had brought. Sir, I have standard earth seasonings, but I also packed some of that Centauri pepper blend we picked up on the way here. Might be interesting to try fusion cuisine with alien apex predators. War Chief Velkara's compound eyes were reflecting. Light in patterns that Tom's cultural database indicated meant severe psychological distress. Ambassador, you speak of these creatures as if they were ordinary animals. They are the ultimate expressions of predatory evolution, refined by millions of years into perfect killing machines. Yes, David agreed. That's exactly what makes them so interesting. Perfect killing machines tend to have excellent muscle development and efficient metabolisms. Dr. Chun, have you had a chance to analyze their protein structures? Dr. Chun was now using a small handheld scanner to examine the mountain stalker through the transparent barrier. Preliminary readings suggest very high protein content with minimal waste tissue. The bone density appears optimal for calcium extraction. As well, this creature represents a remarkably efficient biological system. The Keth delegate produced a sound like crystal wind chimes in a hurricane. You analyzed them as if they were livestock. They could be, Tom said, adjusting the flame on his stove. Most livestock started as wild animals that humans learned to domesticate. These creatures appear to have excellent genetic foundations for selective breeding programs. The Belgian ambassador finally found his voice, though it came out as barely. More than a whisper, you would breed shadow wolves? Eventually, perhaps, Dr. Chun replied thoughtfully. Though I'd want to understand their quantum phasing abilities first. That kind of biological quantum manipulation could have fascinating applications beyond simple food production. Tom had moved to examine the deathbird more closely. The crystalline creature was indeed magnificent, its metallic feathers catching and reflecting light in patterns that created rainbow cascades across the chamber walls. When it spread its wings, the sound was like a sword being drawn from its sheath. Beautiful, Tom murmured. I wonder if the crystalline structure affects the flavor. Mineral content in meat usually correlates with interesting taste profiles. The deathbird fixed him with eyes that seemed to contain miniature galaxies, its head tilting in what might have been recognition of a fellow predator. Instead of recoiling, Tom waved at it cheerfully. War Chief Velkara made a sound that his species typically used to indicate complete mental breakdown. They are not afraid. How can they not be afraid? Fear is counterproductive when you're trying to solve a problem, David explained patiently. These creatures present interesting challenges, certainly, but challenges can usually be overcome with the right approach and proper tools. Dr. Chun had moved to the Shadow Wolf's enclosure and was studying its quantum-shifting form with scientific fascination. This is remarkable. The creature exists in multiple probability states simultaneously. I wonder if that affects its nutritional absorption or if we'd need special preparation methods to stabilize its molecular structure. The Shadow Wolf seemed to sense her attention and turned toward her, its form becoming more solid and defined. Instead of the primal terror that every Belgian experienced when facing their ultimate predator, Dr. Chun simply made more notes on her tablet. Tom checked his cooking equipment one more time, then looked around at the assembled aliens. War Chief, When you release these creatures for the ceremony, would it be possible to do them one at a time? I'd like to ensure proper preparation for each species, and trying to cook 3 apex predators simultaneously might affect the quality of the final dishes. The chamber erupted in a babel of alien languages as the various delegates tried to process what they had just heard. The translator systems worked frantically to keep up with the overlapping conversations, producing a stream of phrases that included cooking 3 apex predators simultaneously, preparation methods, and quality of the final dishes. War Chief Velkara raised all 4 of his arms for silence. When the chamber quieted, he looked directly at David with something that might have been desperation. Ambassador Reynolds, do you truly intend to face these creatures in combat? Combat seems inefficient, David replied. We were thinking more along the lines of field dressing and butchering. Much more practical, and the results are useful for everyone involved. The Cytherian ambassador's scales had shifted to a color pattern that Tom's cultural database didn't even have a translation. FOR? You intend to butcher a mountain stalker while it's alive and trying to kill you? Well, we'd kill it first, Tom said reasonably. Dr. Chun, what would be the most humane method for dispatching creatures of this size and biochemistry? Dr. Chun looked up from her scanner with the thoughtful expression she typically wore when solving interesting technical problems. For the mountain stalker, I'd recommend targeting the neural cluster at the base of the skull. Quick and clean. The deathbird's crystalline structure might require a different approach, possibly using harmonic resonance to disrupt its molecular bonds. The shadow Volf is trickier because of its quantum nature, but if we can collapse its probability wave at the right moment, standard methods should work? Tom nodded and began unpacking additional items from his kit. Along with cooking supplies, he had brought a small toolkit that included several cutting implements designed for field preparation. Of gain, I brought my camping knife set, but I'm not sure if standard steel will be effective against crystalline hide or quantum-shifted tissue. War Chief Velkara watched this casual discussion of murder techniques with the kind of horrified fascination typically reserved for witnessing cosmic disasters. You discuss killing these creatures as if it were routine maintenance. It's really not that different from hunting on Earth, David explained. Humans have been tracking and taking down dangerous predators for thousands of years. The techniques scale up reasonably well for larger specimens. The Belgian ambassador had apparently moved beyond terror into a kind of shocked numbness. You hunt shadow wolves on your world? We don't have shadow wolves specifically, Tom replied, testing the edge of one of his knives. But we have plenty of predators that use stealth and ambush tactics. Humans learned to counter those hunting strategies pretty early in our evolutionary history. Dr. Chun was now recording video of each creature through her tablet's camera. I want to document their movement patterns and behavioral responses. This data could be valuable for developing hunting strategies for future encounters. The Keth delegate produced another sound like breaking crystal. Future encounters? You plan to seek out more deathbirds? Well, if they're as nutritious as they appear to be, there might be commercial potential, Dr. Chun said thoughtfully. Earth's restaurant industry is always looking for exotic protein sources. Properly managed, these species could represent significant trade opportunities. War Chief Velkara sat down heavily on a ceremonial stone that had been placed near the chamber's center. Tom's cultural database indicated that Threxians only sat during moments of complete physical or emotional exhaustion. I do not understand. These creatures represent the ultimate fear for their respective species. They are death incarnate, terror given form. How do you see them as commercial opportunities? Everything is a commercial opportunity if you approach it correctly, Tom said, arranging his cooking spices in neat rows. The key is understanding what you're working with and adapting your methods accordingly. David walked around the perimeter of all 3 enclosures, studying each creature with the same calm attention he might give to a military briefing map. Dr. Chun, what's your assessment of their physical capabilities compared to Earth predators? She consulted her tablet where she had been compiling comparative data. The mountain stalker appears to have strength and speed comparable to a large crocodile, with the added complexity of its venom delivery system. The death bird shows flight, characteristics similar to a peregrine falcon but with much larger mass and weaponized wings. The Shadow Wolf's quantum abilities make it difficult to compare directly, but its base form suggests something like a dire wolf with interdimensional hunting capabilities. So, within normal parameters for apex predators, David concluded. Dangerous. Certainly, but not beyond human hunting experience. Tom had been listening while he prepared his cooking station, and now he looked up with interest. Sir, didn't we study similar situations during our academy training? The survival courses covered hunting and preparing dangerous wildlife on hostile planets. Exactly what I was thinking, David replied. This is really just a practical application of standard colonial survival skills. The Cytherian ambassador's scales were now cycling through colors so rapidly that he looked like a living rainbow of confusion and panic. Standard colonial survival skills? You regularly hunt apex predators as part of basic training? Not exclusively, Tom said, but learning to identify, track, and take down dangerous local wildlife is pretty fundamental for any species that wants to establish settlements on new worlds. You can't build colonies if you can't deal with whatever's already living there. Doctor. Chin had moved back to the mountain stalker's enclosure and was now taking detailed measurements through the transparent barrier. I'm particularly interested in the venom production system. If we could harvest and synthesize that compound, it might have applications in mining and construction. Any substance that can dissolve rock could be very useful. War Chief Velkara looked around at the other alien delegates as if seeking confirmation that he wasn't experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. The Keth delegate had stopped making sounds entirely and appeared to be in some form of crystalline shock. The Belgian ambassador was staring at the humans with the kind of wide-eyed expression typically associated with religious experiences. Dr. Chun, David said, what would you estimate as the processing time for each creature? I want to make sure we can prepare all three properly without rushing. She considered the question seriously, occasionally glancing back at her measurements and notes. The mountain stalker would probably take about 2 hours for complete field dressing and initial preparation. The death bird might be faster if we can remove the crystalline feathers efficiently. The Shadow Wolf is the unknown quantity because of its quantum properties, but I'd budget at least 3 hours to be safe. Tom began calculating cooking times based on the estimated meat yields. So we're looking at a total prep time of maybe 7 or 8 hours plus cooking time. War Chief, would it be possible to start with the mountain stalker and work our way through the others? I'd hate to have the early dishes get cold while we're still processing the later ones. The Threxian leader made a sound that might have been laughter or weeping. Tom's cultural database wasn't sophisticated enough to distinguish between them. You want to process all three creatures tonight? Well, it seems like a shame to waste the opportunity, Dr. Chun said reasonably. How often do xenobiologists get access to 3 completely unknown apex predator species in a single evening? This is incredibly valuable research data. David nodded in agreement. And from a diplomatic perspective, sharing the prepared dishes with all the delegations would be an excellent cultural exchange opportunity. Food has always been one of humanity's most effective diplomatic tools. The Cytherian delegate finally found his voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You want to serve Mountain Stalker to a Cytherian delegation? Why not? Tom asked, genuinely curious. Is there some cultural taboo about eating your apex predators? We can prepare it separately if there are dietary restrictions we should be aware of. War Chief Velkara slowly stood up from the ceremonial stone, his compound eyes reflecting light in patterns that Tom was beginning to recognize as complete bewilderment mixed with reluctant admiration. Ambassador Reynolds, in all my years of diplomatic service, I have never encountered a species that responds to ultimate predators by discussing seasoning preferences and cooking times. Different species, different approaches, David said diplomatically. Humans have always been adaptable. When we encounter a problem, we typically try to find a way to turn it into a solution. Dr. Chun looked up from her tablet with sudden excitement. Oh, I just realized something. War Chief, do you have any information about these creatures' reproductive cycles? If we're going to develop sustainable harvesting methods, we'll need to understand their breeding patterns and life cycle requirements. The chamber fell silent again as this new concept registered with the alien delegates. Tom watched their faces, or what passed for faces in their various species, and realized that the humans had just introduced an entirely new way of thinking. About apex predators to the galactic community, War Chief Velkara sat back down on his stone. 3 hours later, the ceremonial chamber had been transformed into something that looked like a combination of a field kitchen and a xenobiology laboratory. Tom had expanded his cooking operation to include several portable stations, while Dr. Chun had set up a complete research workspace with sample containers, analysis equipment, and detailed documentation materials. The Mountain Stalker had been the first to be released from its enclosure, much to the horror of every alien delegate present. Instead of the expected scene of terror and death, the gathered diplomats had witnessed David calmly approaching the massive creature, studying its movement patterns and then efficiently dispatching it with a precisely placed strike that Dr. Chun had calculated to cause instant unconsciousness followed by rapid death. War Chief Velkara had stopped trying to understand what he was witnessing and had instead begun taking notes of his own. The Threxian concept of honor was being completely redefined by humans who treated ultimate death machines as interesting logistical challenges. Tom was currently working on the Mountain Stalker's preparation while Dr. Chun supervised the extraction of the venom sacs. The crystalline deathbird had been processed with similar efficiency, its beautiful feathers carefully removed and sorted for potential later use. The Shadow Volf had presented the most interesting challenge, requiring Dr. Chun to use her quantum scanner to collapse its probability wave at precisely the right moment, but even that had been accomplished with minimal drama. The protein structure is fascinating, Dr. Chun called out from her analysis station. The quantum-shifted tissue has properties I've never seen before. This could revolutionize our understanding of interdimensional biology. The Belgian ambassador had moved closer to observe the humans at work, his earlier terror replaced by something approaching scientific curiosity. Dr. Chun, the Shadow Volf's quantum nature, does its death affect its nutritional properties? Excellent question, she replied, holding up a sample container. The tissue appears to retain some quantum properties even after death, which could make it incredibly nutritious. The cellular energy density is off the charts. Tom looked up from where he was seasoning the first batch of Mountain Stalker steaks. The mineral content from the deathbird is unlike anything I've worked with before. The crystalline structure has created natural flavor compounds that I didn't even know were possible. War Chief Velkara approached the cooking station, his massive form moving with careful curiosity. Ambassador Reynolds, may I ask how your species learned to approach predators with such casual confidence? David considered the question while helping Tom arrange the prepared dishes on serving platters they had improvised from the chamber's ceremonial equipment. I suppose it comes down to how humans solve problems. When we encounter something dangerous, our instinct is to understand it, control it, and find a way to benefit from it. Fear is useful for initial survival, but it's not a long-term solution. The Cytherian delegate had been watching the entire process with scales that kept shifting between amazement and disbelief. On my world, the mountain stalkers have controlled entire continents for millions of years. My people have built our entire civilization around avoiding them. Understandable, Tom said, plating the first course with careful attention to presentation. But avoidance is only one strategy. Humans learned early that sometimes the best defense is to eliminate the threat entirely, or better yet, turn it into a resource. Dr. Chen had finished her analysis of the Shadow Volf samples and was now preparing small portions for taste testing. The quantum properties seemed to enhance the flavor profile in ways that normal biochemistry can't achieve. This could be the most interesting protein source discovered in decades. The Keth delegate, who had remained silent throughout most of the evening, finally spoke up in their crystalline chiming voice. Dr. Chun, you mentioned commercial potential earlier. Do you truly believe these creatures could be farmed rather than feared? Absolutely, she replied with enthusiasm. Every apex predator on Earth that seemed impossible to control eventually became manageable once humans understood their biology and behavior patterns. These species just represent more advanced challenges. Tom began serving the first course to the assembled delegates. The mountain stalker had been prepared as a series of small steaks, seasoned with a blend of earth spices and local Threxian herbs that War Chief Velkara had hesitantly provided. The aroma filling the chamber was rich and complex. Nothing like what any of the aliens had expected from their ultimate nightmare creature, War Chief. Velkara accepted his plate with obvious reluctance, staring down at the perfectly cooked meat as if it might spontaneously return to life. This is the creature that my people have used to test courage for thousands of years. And now it's dinner, David said matter-of-factly, taking his own portion. The two concepts aren't mutually exclusive. Something can be dangerous and delicious at the same time. The Belgian ambassador was the first of the non-human delegates to actually taste the prepared mountain stalker. His small mammalian features went through a series of expressions that ranged from terror to surprise to what appeared to be reluctant appreciation. It tastes like victory, he whispered. Tom served the second course, featuring the crystalline deathbird prepared as a delicate roast that caught and reflected light from its mineral-infused tissues. The meat had a unique texture that seemed to shift and change as it was chewed, creating flavor profiles that evolved with each bite. The Keth delegate accepted their portion with obvious hesitation, but after the first taste, their crystalline form began resonating with harmonics that Tom's cultural database indicated meant profound pleasure. This is extraordinary. The mineral content creates flavors that resonate with our own physiology in ways I cannot describe. Dr. Chun presented the final course with scientific pride. The Shadow Wolf had been prepared as a series of small portions that seemed to shift slightly on the plate, their quantum properties creating an almost hypnotic visual effect. This might be the most nutritionally dense protein I've ever analyzed. The quantum enhancement appears to optimize the biological value beyond normal physical limits. The Cytherian ambassador, emboldened by his earlier success with the mountain stalker, tried the Shadow Wolf preparation and immediately began displaying scale patterns that Tom's translator indicated meant extreme pleasure mixed with disbelief. How is it possible that our ultimate fear can taste this good? War Chief Velkara had worked his way through all three courses with obvious amazement, his compound eyes reflecting patterns that indicated a complete restructuring of his worldview. Ambassador Reynolds, what you have accomplished tonight goes beyond simple courage or skill. You have transformed the very concept of predator and prey. David nodded diplomatically while enjoying his own portion of the quantum-enhanced Shadow Wolf. Humans have always believed that understanding and adaptation are more powerful than fear and avoidance. Tonight just demonstrated that principle on a galactic scale. Tom began cleaning his cooking equipment while the alien delegates continued to process their experience. War Chief, would it be possible to get information about the native habitats and breeding patterns of these species? If we're going to develop sustainable harvesting programs, we'll need comprehensive biological data. Dr. Chun was already making plans, her tablet now filled with research proposals and commercial projections. I'm thinking we could establish research stations on each of your homeworlds to study these creatures in their natural environments. With proper understanding, we could probably develop breeding programs within a few years. The implications of what the humans were suggesting began to ripple through the assembled delegates. The Belgian ambassador was already calculating how many shadow wolves his planet might sustain if they were managed as livestock rather than avoided as terrors. The Keth delegate was considering the economic potential of deathbird farming, while the Cytherian ambassador was beginning to see mountain stalkers as a potential export commodity rather than a planetary curse. War Chief Velkara stood slowly, his ceremonial armor reflecting the chamber's lighting as he addressed the gathering. Tonight, the Threxian people intended to test the courage of our galactic neighbors through trial by apex predator. Instead, we have witnessed the birth of an entirely new relationship between civilization and the creatures we fear. David raised his glass of Threxian ceremonial wine in a toast. To new understanding and mutual benefit, may the galaxy never go hungry. The other delegates raised their own glasses, though Tom noticed that several of them were still glancing around the chamber as if expecting more apex predators to suddenly appear. The evening had fundamentally changed how they thought about danger, food, and the relationship between the two. Dr. Chun was already composing her preliminary research report on her tablet. I estimate we could have pilot breeding programs operational within 18 months, assuming we can get the necessary permits and habitat studies completed. The profit margins on apex predator protein could revolutionize interstellar agriculture. Tom finished packing his cooking equipment and looked around at the transformed chamber. Where the evening had begun with terror and trepidation, it was ending with excited discussions of business partnerships and research collaborations. Sir, should I start drafting trade agreements for apex predator meat exports? War Chief Velkara sat back down on his ceremonial stone, but this time it seemed to be from thoughtful contemplation rather than exhaustion. Ambassador Reynolds, the Threxian people will need time to adjust to this new perspective on our traditional trials of courage. But I believe tonight marks the beginning of a very different kind of galactic community. The evening concluded with the various delegations exchanging contact information and research proposals. The Galactic Council's handbook would need an entirely new section on cross-species culinary diplomacy, and Tom made a mental note to recommend that future diplomatic missions include expanded cooking facilities, as the humans prepared to return to their ship. Dr. Chun was already planning her next research expedition. I want to study these creatures in their natural habitats and document their complete life cycles. This could be the beginning of an entirely new field of xenobiology. David reflected on how a simple diplomatic dinner had evolved into what would probably become known as the Apex Predator Accords, establishing humanity as the galaxy's premier experts on turning ultimate fears into sustainable food sources. The transformation was complete. What had begun as a test of courage had become a demonstration of human ingenuity, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.